O Christ? Really? Jesus has just told his disciples that not one stone will be left and all will be thrown down, that many people will come and try to lead them astray, and many will be led astray, and that they should not be alarmed when they hear rumors and wars, because those need to happen. Oh, and don't forget, there's going to be famine, and this is just the beginning of the birth pangs. Jesus has basically foreshadowed to them the destruction of the temple by the Roman army. Essentially, the center of their world will be destroyed, and it will be a very painful process. Now, I don't know what you're sitting there thinking, but if I were one of the disciples, I'm not sure that this is something that I would be thrilled or enthusiastic to participate in. I mean, think about it. How would you feel if Jesus told you that you are going to encounter wars, famines, false leaders? It's going to hurt, and that is just the beginning of the pain. Everything you see around you, everything you have become comfortable with, and everything you have come to know will be destroyed. Is that really a praise to you, O Christ moment? When I was 12 years old, my parents sat my sisters and me down to tell us that they were putting our house up for sale and we were moving. At 12 years old, you might as well have put me through the wars and famines, because that's what was about to happen to my world. My parents were taking me away from my room, my friends, the activities that I had really come to enjoy, my school, my neighbors, and the neighborhood that I had basically grown up in, the neighbors that I had grown comfortable with and had known all of my life. You think I wanted to move? Was that really something I wanted to participate in? No. Our house sold, and our parents showed us where they wanted us to move. The house was in a neighborhood, but the neighborhood was surrounded by corn and soybean fields. I had just come from a little city to move to fields. The closest grocery store was about 20 minutes away. The nearest movie theater was about 30. My friends would be anywhere from 20 to 45 minutes away. And the only thing to do in town was a bowling alley. Not something I was thrilled about. All I could think about was how miserable I was going to be. My parents assured me that this would be a difficult process, but the whole family would be there, and I would slowly get used to living in a new place. Now, I haven't been here for very long, but I've heard a similar grief in your voices, or at least some of your voices. Some of you have shared stories with me about being at Zion when it was just the little country church out in the middle of nowhere, where Church 1 used to be surrounded by fields and the highways weren't there. You've even shared memories and appreciation of knowing everyone that came to worship. While you haven't had the experience of a Roman army destroying your home or church, the grief of change and transition can often feel as if someone is destroying everything you know, everything you are comfortable with, and turning your world around. But Jesus says, don't be alarmed. Don't be alarmed? How are the disciples and how are we not to be alarmed when destruction happens, when change happens, when war happens? They were just told about death and destruction, and they're not supposed to be alarmed? What I think Jesus is saying is that through all of this, he will be there. He will be the constant. It seems to be a pretty ridiculous statement of don't be alarmed. But Jesus is offering his disciples hope. The hope is that Jesus will always be present in those troublesome times, in the changes, in the destruction, in the war. He will be the constant throughout our lives. The difficult part about this is that it doesn't mean that those changes, transitions, and difficulties will be any easier. We still have to endure the wars, the famines, the destruction, and the death. However, we do know that through death, Jesus gives us new life. Jesus' death was not the end of the story, and the destruction and wars that Jesus tells his disciples about are certainly not the end of our story. We have been given the hope of new life through Jesus' death. But more than that, we have been given the hope of new life through his resurrection. Buildings will be destroyed, culture and surroundings change, and people move. Moving pushed me out of my comfort zone, and I didn't like it at first. However, I actually did learn to love Lowell, Indiana. I met new friends, received a better education, was in a safer environment, and found plenty of things to do around town and in school. In fact, when I came home from the first break of my college career, I was actually upset that those fields were gone. Instead, neighbors and neighborhoods were being placed there. It wasn't the land that went on for miles. Instead, it was stopped by buildings. The town was growing, and I once again had to get used to something new. While moving was a very difficult experience for me, because it meant that I had to change the way I was living, I was able to experience new life through that move. Looking back on the experience, I'm thankful for that. And as I shared earlier, many of you have shared the grief of not knowing everyone in worship and the effect of the changing community around you. However, when people share those memories with me, they also are really excited and thrilled about the ministries that we are now able to participate in, because we're not that little church on the hill anymore. They're excited about the programs like the drama ministry, the different ways to be involved in the music of the church, the mission trips that they have an opportunity to go on, and other ministries such as the ministry of El Cenizo that they can be involved in. Growing doesn't come without pain, change doesn't come without loss, and loss doesn't come without some form of grief. But through all of this, Jesus brings new life. While we know of the promise of resurrection and new life, we also know that this promise doesn't make it any easier to experience loss. Loss is not something that we can just move on from or just get over. There is pain that comes with that loss. Jesus isn't telling his disciples that the wars, famine, and destruction will be a painless experience. Instead, he tells them not to be alarmed, because the end is still to come. What is going to happen before the end comes? I don't know. What will this look like? I'm not sure. But I do know that Jesus promises us a resurrection like his, that Jesus promises us he will return, and that Jesus promises us that he will be a constant presence in our life. That's not the end of the story yet. And that is the gospel of the Lord to which God's people can reply, "Praise to you, O Christ."